Thank you. So I'm getting the sign. Welcome everyone to a very important hybrid Vel Phillips Forum with the Milwaukee Turners. Today we are going to be examining Milwaukee County's criminal legal landscape from system entry to reentry. I'm Emilio Dottore, Executive Director of the Milwaukee Turners, and we're very excited to be able to bring everyone together again here at Turner Hall and online on Zoom and Facebook Live. Today's nonpartisan virtual forum is being sponsored in part by the Milwaukee County Office of Equity, MICA, NLG Milwaukee, the Public Welfare Foundation, and the Hertzfeld Foundation. I'm going to review a few logistics for our audience in person and for our virtual viewers. In addition to the forum being held here at Turner Hall, our national city and county historic landmark, this forum is being broadcast on both Zoom and on the Milwaukee Turners Facebook page. And we invite you all to share the live feed to your own Facebook pages using the link provided in the chat so that others might share and learn from this important conversation. It is being recorded and the edited version will be shared, but you will be immediately able to see and share the Facebook Live version of the broadcast from our page. Please share it while it's happening so that others can learn from this great panel. For our friends here in person, restrooms are available there through the double doors, and then just follow the sign in front of the bar. For our friends on Zoom, captioning is available. Click on Live Transcript CC icon to use captioning or to turn it off. Then click Show Subtitle. Click View Full Transcript to see the full captioning and stream. And ASL interpreters are available on Zoom only today, and thank you to DJC Interpreting. Please contact Chrissy using the Zoom chat if you need assistance with this. After the panel, there will be an opportunity for the audience to ask questions via chat or index cards. And for viewers on Facebook Live and Zoom, you can ask your questions in the comments or chat, and we will share those with our panelists. If you'd like to ask a question here, please use an index card at the back of the room. Today's panelists, as you can see, include Professor Ted Lentz from the Helen Bader School of Social Welfare at UWM, Evan Goyke, our City Attorney, Shannon Ross, the Executive Director of the Community, and Judge Carl Ashley, the Chief Judge of the 1st Judicial District. So let's dig in. The Milwaukee Turners Vel Phillips Forum examining Milwaukee County's criminal landscape from system entry to reentry. Professor Ted Lentz and his team, Sarvat Sharif and Jolyn War, have authored a lengthy data landscape of Milwaukee's criminal legal system, from point of contact with law enforcement to the courts to incarceration and reentry. There are deep racial disparities all over the criminal legal landscape for youth and adults in Milwaukee. These have clear cumulative impacts on the community, how public entities treat people, and how decisions are made that impact the residents and resources of Milwaukee. There are a few recent events to help us contextualize. Just 3 weeks ago, Governor Evers appointed Jared Hoy as the new Secretary of Corrections. Just 6 days ago, Waupun Warden Randall Hepp was jailed only hours before a news conference on prison death investigations. And according to DOC Secretary Hoy, over 20 individuals remain under internal investigation. An additional 9 individuals against whom criminal charges have not been filed at this time are no longer employed at the department. And an additional at least 8 individuals at WCI remain on administrative leave based on DOC's internal investigations. Milwaukee County's new secure detention center for youth looks like it may cost an estimated $30 million, with an increased focus on providing therapeutic services for the young people it detains. But this will invariably come with additional financial asks for specific proprietary programming and therapeutic staff. And the Milwaukee County Jail is only 11 people away from its max capacity of almost 1,000 people. 35,000 Wisconsin residents are currently locked up in various facilities, and according to the Prison Policy Institute, an additional 60,000 Wisconsinites are on probation and parole. By July 1st, it will cost us over $460,000 to incarcerate one child for 1 year. The United States, and Wisconsin specifically, is a gross outlier in how many people we lock up, especially when we dig below the surface and see the cruel way these punishments are disproportionately inflicted upon Black and Indigenous residents. But really, prison is only one aspect of this system, and Professor Lentz is going to tell us about the Milwaukee County criminal legal system data landscape, and then we'll discuss what it shows us and what opportunities exist to repair the harm and improve our society. If you didn't get a chance to review the fantastic report that Professor Lentz and his team prepared, you can scan the QR code at the entrance to view a copy or the link that's in the chat. I'm going to turn it over to Professor Lentz now.
All right, thank you, Emilio. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Ted Lentz. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And all right, volume good? All right. I'm really excited to be here today. I have Sarvat with me, and I know Jolin's online. So our team, we're really excited. We've been working on this data project for about a couple of years now, and we're really excited. We finally have the report, and we're here to kind of to get it out there, right? Get it out into the public. We want people to see it. We want people to have access to it. So thank you all so much for being here. We think this is a really valuable and really important part of our process. We also would like to thank the Public Welfare Foundation for funding this work. So I'll start off with a question. What do you want in your criminal legal system? A lot of people would probably say justice, right? We call it the criminal legal system intentionally. It's not a justice system necessarily for everybody. So we do refer to it as the criminal legal system. And coming from the university, we see our role in change. We see our role in the process towards changing towards a better system. Of filling this gap, or using data to fill some gaps. So, of course, we want to be able to trust our criminal legal system, and part of that is access or transparency, right? And so data can be one vehicle for increasing transparency, but there has to be access. Now, in our report, we lay out there that a lot of the data almost all of the data we used are open access. They're freely, publicly available for download online, but it doesn't always necessarily mean that it's accessible or usable, readily usable. Some of the files that we got were not even close to usable the way that they were downloaded, so we had to do a lot of work to kind of prepare the data. And so that we kind of see that as part of our role here is filling this gap of taking the data that sure, they're there and they're available, but trying to help make some sense out of it. And we're not the only ones working on this, by the way. There's other folks that have produced reports, have dug into many of the different issues here in Milwaukee, whether it's statewide, nationwide. But one of the things that we saw value in thinking about a data landscape of the criminal legal system was bringing together what we see are the silos, the data silos. So if you're coming from the DA's office, you have your data. If you're coming from the police department in the county, you have your data. And we have all these buckets of data, or all these silos. And sometimes it's sometimes it's important to step back and see the bigger picture. And so what we did was we first had to figure out, okay, what exactly is the criminal legal system? Or how do we define that? What are the boundaries? Or at least, what are they for this report that we're going to work on? What data are we going to actually gather? And so we started off with the simple just police, courts, and corrections. So we broke the system into those three basic parts, and we asked, what data are available? What can we say just very... what are the basic sort of patterns and trends that we can look at? What's going up? What's going down? How does it break down by race, et cetera? And then through that process, we would identify, okay, there are some data needs, in some particular issues, but then also coming, out into the community to talk to folks and say, what are we missing? We see this report as the 1.0 report. We titled it that intentionally, that with the expectation that there's going to be more. This is just the beginning. And so this was, one piece of that data landscape. As I mentioned, we went to you can't see on here, but it's just a screenshot of I think this is DOC's dashboard website. So we went to these dashboards. We downloaded spreadsheets if we needed to get the actual spreadsheets. And the district attorney's office has a great dashboard as well. So we went to places that anybody can access. We didn't get really any data that aren't out there and available. And then what we did was we kind of broke the system down. So it's a really complicated system, and I've looked at so many flowcharts of people of how people go through the system, right? All the different pathways they can take, all the different trajectories, et cetera. And so what we did was, in this project, we really wanted it to be a visual. And so we wanted to visualize sort of the steps, the flowchart of the stages of the criminal legal system here in Milwaukee, and then connect data points to each one of those. So just to go through the diagram very briefly, you start off with, on the left, police contact. That's sort of entry into the system, right? Contact with police. Followed by arrest, referral for prosecution, charging decisions by the DA's office, conviction and sentencing, and then depending on where the case goes from there, whether it's incarceration, community supervision, et cetera, and then the kind of the feedback loop of recidivism, reoffending, being rearrested, and sort of getting put back into the beginning of the system to go through it again. So we gathered data for each one of these points. And so what I want to do is, I don't have time to go through all the data, obviously, in the report. But Amelia mentioned there are several ways to get access to it, and it's freely publicly available. If you want a copy, just send an email, and we can definitely get it to you. But I want to just kind of give a flavor of the sort of data stories that we were trying to tell. So, for example, this is a time series graph that's just showing arrest rates over time. From 2010 through 2023, the arrest rate is the number of arrests divided by the population. So what you're seeing here is, say in 2010, it was about 27 arrests per 1,000 residents in Milwaukee. Now, what you can see is there's obviously a jump in 2018, 2019, and then arrests drop pretty quickly in 2020. Obviously, that's largely due to COVID, or at least that it kind of helps explain that. But overall, it's somewhat of a stable or maybe decreasing line, right? That since 2010, do we have more arrests today than in 2010? Maybe somewhat fewer. But what we like to do when we look at data is pair this data point with another one. So in this case, what we did was we wanted to look at how is the black-white disparity changing as the arrest rate changes or stays the same. And what we found was that black folks are since, let's see, 2021, black folks are arrested at a much higher rate, or the rate at which they're being arrested is getting larger than that for whites. So in other words, let's see. So if you look on the right side of the chart, you can see that in 2023, you're talking about black folks arrested at 4.7 times the rate of white folks. So the disparity is increasing. Even though arrests are staying somewhat stable, maybe going down somewhat, disparities are increasing. Now, our data can't tell us why that's the case, but it's an issue. And so hopefully the data can highlight this as an issue, and then folks that are working in the system can talk about this and say, what's going on? Another example, here we have, this is from the district attorney dashboard data. You can see that on the top there is total charges issued. Total charges as well as referrals. So in other words, the police refer somebody to the prosecutor's office, and you could see that roughly in 2015, the black bar there is right around, 27,000 charges. It's come down somewhat by 2022, but fairly stable. And the gray bar, or the gray area underneath, is the charges issued. So you have referral from the police, but then does the prosecutor actually charge the offense? Do they press charges? And you can see that it's about, say half, right? So half of the referrals from police actually get charged by the prosecutor's office. And what we found was kind of interesting was that if you break it down by misdemeanor and felony, you can see that on the bottom graph, the percentage of the referrals that resulted in a charge is actually decreasing at a faster rate for misdemeanors than it is for felonies. So misdemeanors are getting charged less overall. Again, we can't say exactly why that's the case, but it could be an important piece of the puzzle. This was also charging rates over time by race and ethnicity. In the DA's data, you're able to really break down the race and ethnic identities a little bit better, and so we were able to look at this over time. You can see that, again, charging kind of charging rates have been coming down slightly, at least since 2020. Racial disparities, there's a dotted black line that shows racial disparities, and that went up in 2020, and it's kind of staying the same. So again, we have this pattern that we've seen a couple of times, and it shows up in other parts of the system where you have the system contracting somewhat, less happening, less arrests, less charges, less incarceration, but greater disparity, right? Greater difference between white and black. So let's see. I think this is my final sort of example data point. This was from, this is youth detention at Val Phillips. This is back to January 2017, so this is a pretty long time this is monthly back to January 2017. You can see the blue line is the population, the orange line is capacity for the facility. So in the last couple of years, it's exceeded capacity. Again, we can't say necessarily why that's the case, but there may be folks in here, or a lot of other folks who have a lot of thoughts about why that's the case. So I mentioned at the beginning that there's been a lot of work on these I don't want to call them isolated issues, but sort of treating issues, focusing in on an issue. And what we wanted to do in this report to kind of add something unique is to step back and say, how can we look at the whole system and sort of visualize what the landscape looks like? What are the ways we can do that? So I showed this diagram before. It's sort of the flow chart of, as you proceed through the criminal legal system, what stages and then what data points do we have. And what we did was we took the bubbles, right, these circles, and we scaled them according to how much activity there is at that stage. So in the beginning of the criminal legal system, there's 34,000 stops, more than 34,000 police stops recorded in 2022. That's where most of the action in the criminal legal system is, right? There's a ton of arrests, it's front-loaded. There's a ton of arrests, or I should say stops, arrests, and referrals, and then things really kind of start to size down. So this, it kind of helps us visualize how much activity there is. But I think one of our more powerful figures, or important figures, is then we did the same thing, but now we separated it by black and white to show the difference, right? So we scaled the bubbles according to how much, or what the rate was. And you can see, so the black bubbles up on top is for black, the bottom is for white. And you can see, just looking at it, that the black bubbles are much larger, right? The rates are much higher for black folks. And when you compare it then to the white across, you can see the racial disparity, like how much larger is it for black than for white? And so for police stops, black folks were arrested at 3.1 times the rate of white folks. So for every white person that was stopped, 3 black people were stopped. And as you go through the system, you can see that that disparity increases. So it's 3.1 at stops, it's 4.5 at arrest, it's 6.6 at referrals, and it's 7.7 times higher for incarceration. So what we're kind of learning from this is, and this sort of follows, patterns that you see in criminal, not just in Milwaukee, but in criminal legal systems across the country, that disadvantage due to race accumulates. It sort of has it piles up, right? Any disadvantages that happen earlier on sort of have a trickle down or a cascading effect downstream. And so you have, a 3.1 disparity up front, but a 7, almost 8 times disparity towards the back end. So this was our attempt, again, to take what data were sort of easily accessible, and do something, try to visualize, try to visualize the landscape. What does it look like? And what can the data tell us about it? And what's missing? So our next steps, again, this is our 1.0 report, which is just our way of saying there's a 2.0 coming. We want to expand. We see this, we got data, we got a lot of data from the system. There's a lot of blind spots though. We didn't ask people about their experiences yet. We didn't, and there's a lot of good work on that available too if you're interested to check out. But we want to, this is one piece of the landscape, and now we're kind of asking what's missing? What else is part of the landscape? What other data do we need, or who other people, what other folks do we need to talk to, and how can we be a resource, right? How can we collaborate and be a resource with people? And so I guess with that, I'll stop talking and boring everybody with the data, because I know data sometimes it scares people. So hopefully it wasn't too scary, and hopefully the report helps to ease that a little bit. But again, we're really excited to hear from people, really excited to hear what the other panelists have to say. Interested in getting their thoughts, and moving forward, it's a very reflexive process. We're kind of adapting to the situation. We want to know what people are thinking, what the needs are, and then how can we move forward with our 2.0 in a way that really serves the people of Milwaukee. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that a lot of hard work went into this landscape. So we have a lot of questions. We received almost 30 questions online prior to the event from all the folks viewing, and then we have some other questions. And I know the judge has to step out briefly for a little bit in return, so I'm going to just ask some open-ended questions and give him first at bat. This is a lot of information. What pops out to you, to each of you, but starting with the judge, what is one way that we might use this data to begin addressing issues with the criminal legal system?
First of all, Dr. Lentz and Dr. Sharif and Dr. Warren, thank you for the work you did. Data is important. I'm not afraid of data. I embrace it, because that's a foundational tool for us to see where we are and also to judge where we're going. So I'd like to thank the audience here, those here and those viewing otherwise, because we can't do this without you. One of the things, I've been a judge for 25 years, and one thing I know for sure, we don't have all the answers. And if we don't look for the community to help support us and guide us, what jumps out to me is some of this, well, I have to say I'm not surprised by some of this, okay? But it's good to have the data. And as this say, 0.10, we're going to 0.02, we're going to dig a little further and get more information from people about what they think would have been helpful to turn themselves around. Let me just be very clear with you. Our community wants it to be safe. All of us walk out of here and we want to be able to walk to our car, walk home, and get there safely. So there's something about making sure we have public safety as a high, important part of what we do. But ladies and gentlemen, let me also tell you this. There are some people that need to be incapacitated for a period of time. But most people are going to be released. And the question is, do we release them in a way in which they can be more successful, or do we set them up to go back and cause more problems in our community? And another bigger picture, and I'm going to defer on this, is, because I know you have questions for me, is we got to go upstream a bit. Not a bit, a lot. Because what we want to do, we're going to talk about reentry and how important it is that once people are in the system, that we help them come back and have a positive outcome. But as someone said to me, let's have no entry. How do we get ahead of it so that these young folks, and just anybody, you don't need to go through the process to get turned around. And so we need to have more resources. So I'm going to turn it over to Emilio, by the way. Thank you for turning all you do to allow us to have these type of forums and communication.
Thank you. Do you other folks want to take a look at the same question? You know, what is one way to, to use this data?
Yeah, I don't want to lose a Rochambeau to you. It's already the disparity of more water bottles up here than I have. Yeah, I guess for me what stands out with the data is that it's not surprising whatsoever. I think it's exactly what I've seen, what I know. I think most of us would say the same thing. And the next steps on it, I think, you know, we should be able to get hopefully some more dig-in as to why some of these things are, again, not like a why that we probably don't know. I think a lot of this is, you know, as obvious as puddles after rain. When it comes to, you have, you know, a history of racism in the country. You have segregation in our city that's remarkably well known across the country. So a lot of this is going to be in that place. But you talk about, you know, upstream, right? And then the question then goes from, instead of just getting mad about the fact we're seeing this and then it's happening, what do we actually do about it? And that's a much more complicated question that I find every time I'm in a room where I'm talking to people who've made difficult decisions, or we have to figure out how to solve something. There are all these elements that I never really thought of prior to getting into this work. I guess step back, you know, I'm kind of a child in this work, right? I've been out of prison for 3.5 years. I spent 17 years in prison. I went in when I was 19. So a lot of this is just kind of me getting into a space based off of what I was watching from my ivory dungeon, as I call it, inside, and just observing and thinking, like, what needs to change? What can I offer of value? What are people doing wrong? And then you get out here and it's like, it's really complicated, right? To make some of these decisions, you want to peel back one layer to solve it and you find 6 more layers, right? And a whole lot of bugs and insects and rats. And so it's just, I think the takeaway for me ultimately when I look at that is how much of a commitment that I think a lot of us have to have coming into this. I think I find a lot of folks getting involved in this type of work, legal system work, reentry work, just dealing with people that are dealing with a lot of trauma in their life, a lot of ACEs, and they think it's going to be an easy matter of just like, let's just provide support or resources or be there for them, and it's so much more difficult than that. Like, it's so incredibly difficult, and you have to be committed when you get into this work, and if you are, you'll start to find that there are ways to do it, there are ways to solve things, there are examples across the world, throughout history, across the country, even in the state, that we can learn from, and I think I've been encouraged by seeing a lot of people that are really serious about that in the county, despite the disparities. I find a lot of systems folks in the county up here. You got 2 examples of people who are very committed in this space, and it's just a matter of, I think I always try to ask myself and talk to other people that are my colleagues in the work about, at the end of the day, the things that have caused these disparities, they're not some entity that's out there. It's not just the system. It's us. We are that problem, right? Every time somebody, I can't tell you how many times somebody is all in the legal system work or abolition, their car is stolen, call the police, lock them up. Can't be that way. Like, if you're in this work, you're in this work, and you understand what compassion and forgiveness mean, and you understand that justice is not punishment, justice is accountability, and that means something different for each individual. And so if we're trying to solve solutions that are very difficult, you can't do that with a suit on, not insulting anyone up here, I'm just saying that you have to roll your sleeves up. Even myself, right? You can't do it in a nice shirt. You can't do it from a distance. You have to get involved. It's very dirty work. It's very much difficult work. And so if you're gonna get into this space and be serious and criticize what we're looking at, you have to be able to say that when something happens to me, I also want to have a solution that goes beyond relying on the easy, lazy solution of the system, and what can I do? How can I lean in to have more principles that are in line with what we want to see in my own life and how I respond to conflict and people that are upsetting me? So I think, this is us, and we can't get away from this data by looking at it like it's the system or it's other people. It's us. Right? Every day we are kind of in this same, results.
Well, I won the rock, paper, scissors, so I should have been able to go first.
You went after me, so I
following
lost.
You is
You lost.
hard, Shannon. Thank you for having me tonight, and for those that have not gotten a chance to look at Dr. Lentz's work in greater detail, and as somebody that's spent a lot of years in the data or in the politics around the data, there's some really, really critical visuals there for you to take a look at, and I would really implore everybody to do that. I really like the breakdown within city and suburb and neighborhoods that I think paint a picture of what this data feels like for residents in the various neighborhoods of Milwaukee on a daily basis. What I want to share at the outset is that the task is daunting, and I hope that we do not have paralysis through analysis, that when you look at the various number of bubbles and all of the different places that need to be reformed, changed, re-envisioned, whatever you want to call it, it's going to take an incredible effort and time to achieve that. So I have served in the Wisconsin State Legislature for 11 and a half years and tried to, largely unsuccessfully, tried to make many of these changes realized. And what I want to leave you with as part of my experience as I leave that job is it will take a group of people dedicated and focused on one aspect of one of those bubbles to get a bill written, introduced, debated, and passed in the Wisconsin State Legislature. And I'm not saying that in the woe is me, one majority, gerrymandering. I'm just talking about government is hard, and it can be slow, and it can be frustrating. And so what often happens, too often I think, is we look at this system and we say, we need 1,000 different things to change from that initial interaction to reentry. That's true. To get to 1,000 change things, you have to start at one. And a lot of times, it's been my experience that Group A wants to do revocation reform, and Group B wants to do police reform, and Group C wants to do reentry, and Group D wants to do housing, and all valid, all totally right and righteous in their own lanes. And yet, progress on all of them is minimal. And in this policy realm, in this political environment, regardless of the party in power, we change makers stand on a very, very, very narrow edge. Moments and opportunities to get a bill across the finish line and signed into law are very hard and fleeting, and my hope is we take a look at this, the community, people, system-impacted individuals, residents come forward to say we want charging decisions changed or we want police interactions changed, and then we all just work together and do it until it's achieved, and you watch the governor sign that law sign the bill into law, and then we agree, okay, what's next? And then we do what's next, and what's next, and what's next. But if we try to take it all on, one big bill that does 1,000 things, it'll never pass. I've written it, I tried. It is too much for the political government system to do. We've got to target a couple of really meaningful, impactful areas that would have a huge dent in disparities, a huge positive increase in quality of life, not compromising public safety, and then just be rabid, unapologetic advocates until it's done, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again, until Mr. Lentz's data reflects the different outcomes.
And Professor, you're always welcome to answer any of the questions that we're aiming at these folks too. You've all given me some food for thought here. One thing that is connected to what you were saying, City Attorney, given the disconnect between, say, actual crime rates and the way media coverage and other factors can scare people into thinking that crime is out of control, how can we depoliticize decisions around this topic so that policymakers aren't politically incentivized into making reactionary changes that harm our communities? Essentially, we have all this data, and we know already a lot of what works and what doesn't. How can we make sure that this is what policymakers are using in their decisions instead of giving into fear-mongering?
It's a great question, Emilio, and it's incredibly difficult. And Shannon, in his answer, really hit the nail on the head. And I hope that as you listen to Shannon react to the presentation, and he challenged each one of us, what would our reaction be if it were our vehicle? Remember, lawmakers, city council members, county board all have that kind of shared experience as well. So here's what I have had the most success reaching across the political aisle when people actually come here, and that we demythicize Milwaukee. A lot of my coworkers from outstate, again, both parties, have, I think, an inaccurate and outdated and largely race-based view of what Milwaukee is and what Milwaukee isn't. And I think when you show up here and you meet people and you spend time in the community, you realize that the TV coverage and the sensationalism and that kind of, it doesn't tell the full story. I live on 27th and State. It is statistically a high-crime neighborhood. There was a homicide on Saturday, late afternoon, early evening, a shooting. I don't feel unsafe at all in my neighborhood. The data would suggest that I should feel unsafe there, and to many of my colleagues' surprise, like, I live there, and it's normal, and I've been there for, 13 or 14 years, and it's not a big deal, because when you get to know the fabric of the block that I live on, you realize that it is actually an incredibly safe neighborhood, and a really tight-knit group of neighbors, and you just have to break those barriers down, and we do that by not othering each other. So my first task is, how do you bring those people that are not from Milwaukee here and open our doors in our community? But then let's also avoid the reverse. And let's avoid drawing conclusions of somebody who's from not here. And let's not conclude that they're hostile to Milwaukee because they're from Shawano County. That might be true. That might not be true. And I think too often in the political space, Emilio especially, we're just kind of camped, and you're rural and Republican, and you're urban and Dem, and we'll never, so we just don't talk, and we don't, and then the headlines win, because it's on your phone, and we don't have meaningful connections. So the more we can have, people of, differing geography, political persuasion, identities, whatever, in this type of conversation, the better.
And can I just,
Please.
if I could, first of all, I agree wholeheartedly, Evan, with your comments, and Shannon, you kind of alluded to it. We've got to understand some of the things that complicate people's life: mental health, addiction, trauma, and particularly trauma. I don't think as a community we understood the impact that trauma can have on a person, their families. We think about what goes on in those family constellations, and you're surprised that we have these kind of outcomes. So one of the things I'd like to point out, as the city attorney has said, Mr. Goyke, you got to look at what the evidence shows in the data. If you look at some of the programs like problem-solving courts, if you are able to provide people with alternatives to change their life, the data will show you we get great outcomes. We reduce recidivism. When I was a problem-solving judge, so I had a problem-solving court where we got around a table like this. We have a DA, public defender, case manager, maybe a specialist there, the judge, and we're trying to figure out what it would take for this individual to have a better outcome. Inevitably, we get better results. But more importantly, it creates a dynamic in that family. What did my graduates say? Judge, it's been 25 years since any of my family ever asked me for advice. But I've turned my life around. So when you see the bad things happen in the community that's sensationalized, it diminishes all the good things that are going on. And we need to kind of realize there are some positive things going on that we're doing in our community that are changing lives. And if we can do it at a bigger scale, we can really change. And back to the numbers, Lentz, I want Sharif, I want those numbers to look at the data on some of the mechanisms we can use to create better outcomes. and I got to run, but I'm coming back.
Thank you, Josh. Shannon, same question. I mean, one of your efforts, just the whole correcting the narrative philosophy is certainly a tool towards this end. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, I think two things kind of stand out here from the comments from, can I call you
Just
Evan?
Evan, please.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's been a lot of city
I
attorneys.
know, way
throwing
too
me off
much,
here.
please, thank you.
So, things that Evan and Judge Ashley were saying is that two things can be true at once, right? It can, on one hand, be fear-inducing to go through the city in certain areas, certain times of night, certain times, right? It can also be true that it's not a concern. It's not like a dangerous, Mad Max type of scene going through the city. I've been out, again, 3.5 years. I'm about as absent-minded as you'll find. I haven't had my car stolen. I haven't had it broken into, right? I've lived on 47th and Meineke for a lot of that where my parents grew up, and where I grew up, rather, where my parents live. And I have had a different experience, right? I also am not involved in things that sometimes I think bring on potential crime, and a lot of crime is connected to somebody else involved in like this kind of illegal stuff, right? So it's very complicated, it's nuanced, there's context there behind the data, but those two things can be true, and I think that's something that we hide a lot of times when we talk to people, where we either try to say, the city is safe, it's okay, come through, like there's nothing to worry about here. Like you see the Visit MKE commercials and everyone's like drinking a brewski on the leak, like, and it looks like the most wonderful place ever, right? But that's one Milwaukee. There's a whole larger part of Milwaukee where that's not really the experience, but it doesn't mean it's dangerous, it doesn't mean it's not safe, it just means that there's nuance there. And if we have that conversation on the nuance, and if we bring people to understand how we then can go to a problem-solving hat instead of just complaining about and worrying about things, you get to an aspect of, I think, where the narrative kind of really comes in. And we're at a Circle conference, Restorative Justice Conference, Friday at Marquette, and James Morgan, who works, I think, with Just Dane or in Madison, and he had a really powerful line that I wish I had come up with or known all this time. It was that language is the currency of power. And I think we don't really understand how powerful the way we talk about problems, the way we talk about ourselves is in this space. So the way I'm talking about this right now, I wouldn't say any of this necessarily to a crowd in, Baraboo or in, Oshkosh or somewhere where there's maybe a more whiter conservative, different voting base, a different demographic. I would really emphasize the humanity of people that have a record. I'd emphasize the things going on at Waupun, the ineffectiveness of it, right? But I think when we talk to a group of folks that I think are more in this room that are in the choir, right, humanizers, leaning a little bit different there, I think it's kind of just leaning more towards solutions and away from stone throwing and complaining. And when you look at the way narrative is addressed and the way we talk about these problems, the way we ruin an opportunity before, as you said, thinking that someone's not going to give us a chance before we even talk to them, then there's not going to be any chance. There's not going to be any conversation. We just had a bill passed by the Republican chair of the Corrections Committee, right, Michael Schra. I mean, Michael Schra is about as wonderful a person in this issue as I've found, very open-minded in terms of like on the other side to problem solve, right? And so you would think from just his label, I'm not talking to that person, right? I've heard people who here that we're working with didn't even hear the name, didn't know him, just knew he was a Republican chair of the Corrections Committee, and it was right away disregarding the possibility of a conversation. I've had Jed, who, at Public Welfare Foundation, who said that across the country, he finds that formerly incarcerated people are much more likely to get a bill passed or get some kind of a conversation going because they don't bring into the world this beef of years and decades of battles politically, right? All I care about is helping people that are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. I don't care about any other issue because that's not going to help the issue that I'm trying to fight for. And that attitude when I go into that makes it easier for me to connect and have a conversation. I'm also not saying that I'm doing everything right? Or that I just know that's going to be the secret sauce. But I know that it has created an avenue for us to get things done that is just different because I'm not assuming you're my enemy, right? I'm assuming that there's a conversation here that can be had, and I just need to find the right door to your brain, to your heart, to your soul. And it just changes things, I've found, significantly. And I think the last thing I'll say is that people oftentimes, they have this concept of, not oftentimes, wildly, I think even those of us that are in this space, even like people that are formerly incarcerated, some of the least likely people to be open-minded to not locking people back up are people who've been in prison. And that's because when you are in prison and you're experiencing the individuals that are just going through those co-occurring disorders and the trauma and this criminal thinking, you're like, I don't want this person by me outside in society. But it's more complicated than that, because that person is living in the situation that the environment is kind of encouraging to be in, right? And so we don't see that. We don't see how language and how environments are incredibly powerful when we're dealing with a person right in our face that is very, very frustrating or dangerous to us. And so when it comes to that aspect, is just the way we talk about these issues and ourselves. And I have consistently had people tell me, like, you're formerly incarcerated? Or, you don't look formerly incarcerated. I don't know what the hell that means. I do, but I don't know what the hell that means, and that's how I act. Because I want you to understand that your view and your opinion of a formerly incarcerated person is completely based off of TV, anecdotes, and fears, not based off reality. So let me give you reality and a whole lot more of it, and I can bring you a whole lot more people to demonstrate that your reality is off. And that requires calm, it requires sitting there, it requires going through very dumb, annoying questions, sometimes insulting questions, and then the next time I come around, you don't ask those anymore. You don't talk the same, right? It just creates a different way over time to change that way that you're seeing it and talk about the issue. And again, I think I've taken up more than I should have in this question, but it's just
great.
a lot of that is what I've seen that's relevant in this space.
Very edifying from both of you. And I think, not only this battle to change the policy that exists in our legal system, but also to change the internal policy that exists in our hearts, how we approach these folks, our neighbors, our family. And some of that can be built on the data and statistics that we have, and I know, as indicated directly by the professor and obliquely by you, what don't the data and statistics tell us? And specifically, Professor, was there data that you wanted but didn't get access to? Is the same true for both of you who are working in this field? Is there data that would be useful that might be missing from this report for whatever reason that would be beneficial to push for changes?
Yeah, I could start. I mean, something that definitely, we're going to be looking more into for the 2.0 report is going to be a lot of this context that people are talking about. It's like, what is the context that folks are living in? What are the sort of the structural context? What are the neighborhoods like that are most impacted? How has Shannon brought up long history of racism, segregation, et cetera, et cetera. How can we add that context to this conversation? Because it's important, right? It's people. And I think, talking to people, data can be very dehumanizing. And I think us working with the data, we feel that. It's like it starts to become just numbers. And so part of our next steps moving forward is how do we rehumanize the data? And I think this is part of it is talking to people and getting their stories and their experiences to better contextualize what the numbers are saying for everybody sort of as a group. But the groups are made of individuals with lives and in a situational context, and I think that's completely missing from this initial report, right? Because the system doesn't necessarily collect that sort of relational data. What does your family look like? Employment, those sorts of things aren't necessarily collected in the data. So we're trying to find ways to kind of marry the two together. In a way that we can create a more powerful story that speaks a little bit more to the why, or it's that context. Why is that the way it is? Well, you have to understand the history. You have to understand the context. So I think that's one piece that's definitely missing. I think long term, to do in the data what a lot of people would like to see. I think there's a need for linking the data systems that we have. So we have police, courts, corrections, if I'm just going to simply break it up. And their data systems don't necessarily talk to one another, right? They're maybe not even the same system at all. It's a completely different setup. So one of the things that we wanted to do in this report is if we get all the data together in the same room and hang out, like what does it look like? And how can we create stories from that? And how does that add to the story or enhance our understanding of the situation? So I think finding a way to get to link data so we can sort of follow people and understand, again, to rehumanize the people that are going through the system. They went through this stage, then this stage, and this stage. Being able to follow those trajectories from police to the courts and all the way through. It's possible to do it, but it's not being done necessarily because it's hard and there's a lot of resource problems, and having the expertise and the people power to do it is not necessarily there. And so I think, and there's been efforts to sort of create a better infrastructure for the data, and I think that's definitely something that we're looking at as filling that sort of gap. Is can we start to set this up or at least prototype? This is what could happen if we get the data to talk to each other better. This is the kind of questions we can start answering. Some of the whys, like, well, we have this disparity. Why? Which stage? And we have to be able to see, though. People move, first they were arrested, then they were charged with this, and, maybe that got dropped, but then they got charged with, those stories are important because it helps explain, what you're seeing in total. So, yeah, we're looking for context data, I guess, and we're also planning to do interviews with people, to just do a sort of a series of interviews, and to be able to layer in those experiences into the data to rehumanize it. Because again, we feel that it has that quality of dehumanizing, and so to make it more useful and more impactful. Because I think what Shannon's saying is the humanity of people is so important, and I think if the data takes that away, we're definitely doing a disservice. So, so that's kind of how we're moving forward.
Emilio, I would love to see, so the system, there are a lot of structures around risk assessment and theories of kind of graduated consequences or graduated interventions or responses. And so there is a huge difference between never having been arrested and been arrested once. There is a huge difference between 0 criminal convictions and 1 criminal conviction. And I think Dr. Lentz was talking about that earlier, about this kind of avalanche that happens when someone is kind of interfaces with the criminal legal system and is now a 1 instead of a 0. Different route. Well, then it's a 2 instead of a 1, different route. And there is, and then the outcomes of being a 1 instead of a 0, or a 2 to a 1, or a 3 or a 2 are substantially different. And you see these, and you can hear these lived experiences of individuals that, as a very young person in their teens, had police contact, had very minor charges, and then boom, like that exponentially faster into the prison system in ways that those early encounters just sent that young person onto this other route. And so I'd be really fascinated. I would love to sink into the consequences of that 0 versus 1, because when you're doing that risk assessment evaluation, it's have you ever been arrested? There isn't a qualified answer to that. It's a yes or a no. There isn't a yes, but the charges were dismissed because there was an unconstitutional stop and frisk and detention. You don't get a 0 for that. You get a 1 because you were arrested. And so I just think that there's so many different paths that an individual can take, and that past contact with the criminal legal system really foundationally changes the path that individuals are sent on. And I would love to have some more understanding of those consequences and tracking people that stayed a 1 or stayed a 0 and became a 1.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Ted, but to kind of piggyback off what you're saying, I think one of the biggest frustrations for me in this work, especially in dealing with people who don't understand the significance of the system and behind, because they can read that without context, the story that one can tell themselves is varies, right? And they can see disparities between black and white. Well, black people commit more crimes. So that's the simplest way that somebody might look at that, right? And it's so frustrating to see and hear people say these very do the crime, do the time, these just kind of naive ideas of how you respond to problems without understanding the complexity. Because if you ask a person, what would you do if your son committed a crime? What would you do if your daughter does something at school? No one says throw the book at them. No one says, lock them up. Everyone's right. As soon as your son's the one in court, get a lawyer. He didn't do it. Hope the judge lets him off, right? But if it's somebody else's kid, it's the exact opposite reaction. And so the crux of all of this is we have our sense of family too small, right? We don't think our neighbor is our family. We don't think that even our family is our family sometimes, right? But the more you can understand that your family is every single person in this community, this society, this country, even the world, right? Like someone that I don't even know in Bangladesh right now, if I can look at that person as my brother, it makes solutions here and problems that we are facing so much easier. Because I'm not looking at you as an other, I'm looking at you as somebody who is experiencing a human issue, a trauma, a pain, a mistake you made, and then how do we actually come back from that as best as possible instead of throw it under my bed and say my room is clean. And that's what a lot of this kind of comes down to. And so I think I've met numerous people that are in prison and their families where the daughter or the son, you look at the opioid issue. I think that is a perfect example of how experience hits a different community and now the response is incredibly different, right? I think if you kind of watch this and you're in the space, you know how the crack cocaine epidemic was treated very differently than the opioid epidemic has been, right? And that's you don't have to be studying the research of the data or deep into any academia to realize that is based on race. It is incredibly obviously a reason that's based on small communities are experiencing opioids and those voters are saying this needs to be treated differently. They weren't experiencing the crack epidemic as much, and that issue, we didn't care, get them out of here. And so you have that, and I wonder, Ted, is there a place where they're doing that data soup, as you talk about putting the DOC and the MPD and everybody together, they're doing that well? I'm curious if there's anything. Yeah, if there's anything that you've seen that's like a model where the data is being collected pretty well. And that's a problem.
Well, yeah, it's really hard. I mean,
Yeah.
The Collins settlement. If you're not familiar with the Collins settlement with MPD and the stop and frisk issue, they've done a lot with trying to improve data collection. MPD's done a lot to try to improve. Like they just weren't collecting data before, and they really started filling it in, but. Yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily any models. I am familiar with some efforts. I think some of the CJC I think has had an effort for a while to start pooling the data together to try to find a way to get the systems to talk to one another. But as far as I know, it's not been real successful yet. And even around the country, it's hard. It's hard. There's not a lot of good models for it. So I think, I wouldn't say it's a new space, but definitely something. Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, it's like both of you said, this work is hard, and I think that the data work is sort of the same. Getting people, if you think about it, like if you want to dig into police stops and try to understand decision making, for instance, in police stops, every police stop, there has to be sufficient data for every single one, and you got to be able to trust the data, right? So, and who's entering that? Usually the officer, right? The officer's entering stuff in their computer. There's data entry errors every now and then. There's a lot of missing data, a lot of stuff that's not entered in. And then it's like, what do you do with that? Can we still use the data? Right? And so I think. I don't know if there's any good models that we can that I know of, off the top of my head. But I think enough. I don't know. I think enough people are talking about it. Enough people want it. At least when we go around talking to people about this, it seems like people want it. So I don't know what's stopping it. I guess and that's a question. I don't know. Money.
Political will. Sure. Money. More money. I mean, I'd vote yes. I'm not saying no. I'm not saying against it. I'm just saying
Yeah.
It takes, and then I think there are some systems that are quite defensive that wouldn't want to be in the soup because the being separate can obfuscate what's going on, and there's, at least perceived bureaucratic benefit to that if you're in that machine.
Maybe let's take a look at this almost as a CAT scan. So we see a lot of the data that's mapping things out. Between the police and court phases of our system, which decision points are having the most disproportionate impact on racial disparities and overall incarceration levels? Is that something that the data can show us? And secondarily, are there spaces where we can have more community input and intervention to begin the process of reintroducing folks into the community in some of the similar ways you described, as opposed to funneling them into the carceral machine? So does this data show us any access points where we can interrupt the decisions creating the largest disproportionate impact on racial disparities and incarceration levels? And then where can we also plug community input into this?
I think you should have gave me that question before, so I could have thought about it. A little time. I know you haven't answered.
Well, I mean, that's why we tried to visualize it, because we were thinking, how can we, because it's, I don't know, Evan was mentioning that there's like 1,000 things that need to happen, right? So it's like, well, what's number one then? And I mean, my easy answer is I'm just the data guy, right? Like I just do the data, and I don't know where people are, or where the decision making could change, or where a policy could step in and have an impact. I mean, if you can look at the figures, and like I said, a lot of the system is sort of front loaded, right? And as Evan mentioned, there's this feedback loop. Right, and so the contact with the system, and Chief Judge was talking about no entry, right? If there's no entry, then so I mean that's kind of the easy answer is to look at where the biggest bubbles are, I guess, and to think about the cascade. If you're able to front load efforts, and then you don't have to worry about re-entry if there's no entry. But that's not necessarily the best place to start either. Even if that, even if I could say that that's definitely the biggest problem, that might not be the place to start.
Well, can I just offer, every level of government has some involvement with this system. Some more substantial than others, but for community involvement and the kind of involvement in the political process, there is something that every single unit of government in our county or in the state can do. And so the first thing to do is to take a similar visualization and map out who's in which area. So if you go to the city council and you ask your city council person to fix corrections, there's a mismatch. They do not have jurisdiction over corrections. The state legislature does, and sets in state statute the powers and the budget of the Department of Corrections. If you went to the state legislature and you asked them to deal with standard operating procedures of the police department, there's some involvement. State law has some immediate impact on police procedures, but largely local city government can have an impact there. And so, and there's room for everybody, right? I mean, because there's so much to do at every level, there's lots of work that can be done in parallel to do the 1,000 things that need to be done. How we organize and how we fund and how we support that work and how we avoid turf warfare over which group gets credit for which and that is just the political process. And trust me when I tell you that same thing is happening in the a room like this where healthcare executives are meeting to talk about healthcare policy, and they're like, the Shannon of the group is saying one thing, and then the American Family guy from the other group is, right? The same thing is happening in other entities that involve or are involved in the political process or in the outcomes of government. But there's a robust role for that, but I think it starts. Events like this are great. Turners do it all the time. Different groups do it a lot, which is organizing and educating the citizens of Milwaukee, the residents here, of what's going on, the data, who's responsible for what. So the follow-up presentation is who should you be contacting, and with what ask, and then try to, as I said in my opening comments, unify around what that ask is and be relentless until it's actually done, and avoid, if you can, the new thing that comes in our feed 30 minutes from now that we're all going to be passionate about and that does warrant our attention. But if we lose our focus, we will not be successful at affecting change.
I think what I'm struggling with on that question is that I find that we know exactly what needs to be done. I feel like the community speaks all the time. I feel like that's not necessarily the issue. I feel like anytime I go to symposiums or community round sessions, everything's kind of a repeat of the same stuff we've been saying for decades about what needs to change. Not exactly, like, not to minimize what people are saying, but it's like, at what point does that get listened to and then implemented by those that have the ability to do things? And a lot of that comes to, I feel, the choir talk that happens as well. Like, we also have these conversations in the same groups consistently. And I would love to see things like this kind of pairing with what I call access points in different communities to go and talk to them more and to expand on places that don't really get exposure to this or these conversations on a regular basis, so they can kind of see there's so much more to what they thought when it comes to the issue of justice and the issue of crime. And I think when it comes to the data, kind of the conversation that Ted was having about the next level and stories, we can easily tie in. I mean, we take the worst things from business in political campaigns and we leave the best things. Like, political campaigns and business are pretty good at tapping into your raw emotions to make you do dumb things, right? To vote for people that you probably shouldn't vote for and to buy things you definitely don't need. Mm-hmm. And we don't take advantage of that in spaces that are very much, non-political and non-business. And we need to be aware that human beings, we're all manipulating ourselves, we're all being manipulated, right? Manipulation is just a technical version of being influenced in a way that you will be doing something good for yourself or bad for yourself. And it's not even always saying that I know what's good for you. It's a matter of, I know how to make this tap into your mind a bit more, right? And we can take advantage of that in a way that I do not think we do nearly enough. And the data can be used to turn into stories and creative animations and graphic design novels and in so many different ways that you see when it comes to purchasing things that will connect with the families and the hearts of those that are not in rooms like this, right? And so we can do that, and that's what I think would be a great way to kind of fit in each of these data points was, say you pull out the arrest, right, the nuance. So you have what happens with this same exact arrest in a white community and in a black community, right? What happens with this exact same then arrest and the conviction level in a white community and a black community. And people have experienced this, right? That's one of the things I think is really interesting about the space when it comes to those that have a criminal record. This is a demographic-less group, right? There's no gender, there's no identity. Everyone that you talk to in America has people in their demographic that have been impacted by the justice system, that are impacted by the justice system now. They have family. I get it all the time. People coming out of the woodworks as I tell my story. I didn't, people don't know this, but my brother was incarcerated. People don't know this, but I got a record from 20 years ago. It's like, we need those stories. Quit whispering to me. That's the problem. Now you are ahead somewhere. You have a business. So we need those to come out because the people in your community, you're walking around hee-hee-hawing with people that are just saying crazy stuff about the system and voting stupid, right? And you're not telling them I kind of was actually inside or I have a connection to it. And we need to encourage those to come out more. And I think that's where the data can be paired with getting folks to come out and talk about and offer that nuance at each of those levels and each of those bubbles. So that would, yeah.
So for those that are here, if you raise your hand, we are collecting questions via index card. If you'd like an index card, one of the Turner staff will get to you. And then And we've also collected a ton of questions from online, so I'm going to begin delivering those. This one is directed specifically to the city attorney. How does the city attorney's office ordinance enforcement division renew citations before filing and view the benefits of diversion?
It's a great question. So we have 5 lawyers assigned to that division right now. There's space for 6, so we're trying to staff up, which is a kind of common theme. We receive those citations from the Milwaukee Police Department in a system that's different but somewhat similar in that it was modeled out about the lines from police to the prosecutors. Our office reviews those. That volume is daunting, and we're, like I said, trying to scale back up. And I think that right now we're doing an inadequate job of reviewing all of those citations and diverting out those that we can. It is something that I hope to improve upon. Municipal court has made some decisions that I think have reduced the amount of diversionary services available, which I think is in the wrong direction. The policy is heading in the wrong direction. So I'm excited to dig in. I'm headed over there. It's kind of, I don't want to get into the nuances of the office, but I get to spend the day over there at the end of next week and take a rotation in municipal court and really get mine, not just my offices, but mine personally, around what's going on and be able to have a more educated response in the near future of what type of system change we need. The city attorney's office is a part of that. I'm not the only part of that, but committing tonight and have committed publicly previously to being an agent to help make that change possible. And if the legislative body of the city, the executive branch, the municipal court judges, if we're collaborating and have more diversion options, more accessible courts, my staff and I are going to be there 110% making sure it's successful and that people that get that opportunity to be diverted. But my honest answer is we're not doing an adequate job yet, and we have room to improve there, and we will.
Thank you for that. Specifically to Milwaukee County.
I can answer for Carl. That's fine.
All right, that's great. So what can judges and attorneys do to curb the racial disparities? And is there a solution that you can see, at least a partial solution?
I'm not going to answer for Carl. I changed my mind. Look, let me put an old hat that I used to wear on. And one of the things that Professor Lentz, another data point that would be really beneficial is, and untapped here, is the role of the criminal defense bar and how individuals' rights are represented in the criminal legal system. Who are those lawyers? The training, the caseload. It'd be an interesting view that was missing or is missing right now, and maybe data that's less readily or less available. My experience when I was an attorney in the system here, and I think what I hope judges commit to doing is, if nothing else, slowing down. Just slow down a minute, because what Shannon was talking about with the seeing humanity and listening and trying to get to know in these brief moments in a courtroom who's before them, that is completely impossible when the grind of the system and the pressures of closing cases as fast as possible are paramount above the individuals in the courtroom. And I think that Judge Ashley does a good job of this. I don't think that he gets enough support for it, but I know some of the newer judges, and in talking to them, that they feel that pressure to, you got 60 cases this morning, brand new judge. You got to go. You got to go. You got to go. More of that, less of that pressure, and more of you have 60 individuals. You got to get it right, even if that means slowing down and thinking, listening more, being more deliberate case by case. So it's this incredible tension, and how we relieve that tension and give the judges more capacity is a question really of resource allocation. And, you know, I'm sure if Carl were in the room, he'd probably agree with me at that last point, if nothing else.
Either of you can pretend to be a judge.
I think what Evan is saying is spot on. I think about when we start talking to system actors about their decisions, you learn about, like I was saying, the layers and how it's not as simple as, like, I would love to just say, slow down, right? So if I'm a judge and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna slow down, but then you have other external pressures pushing on you to speed up, even people that are convicted, like, why is my case taking so long? So it's all these different aspects that it's not so simple as just saying, you know, you do this and things will be better. It's like, you do this, and then how does that shift all these other pieces? And then that comes back in a way that, you know, you are removed from the job because suddenly you were too slow, whatever it may be. It's all these different aspects. And so it's almost this complete, I mean, this gets into the dismantling of everything conversation, which is, I mean, I don't know if this is the time for that. There's a whole lot of elements to that. But I think just understanding how the levers all change when you do one thing. And we have judges, same thing as Waupun, right? If I look at what happened in Waupun, it's easy to criticize the folks that were, you know, charged inside Waupun. But at the same time, we have a system in which making these very humanizing decisions is almost impossible sometimes because you're put in a place where you're bound to do terrible things to people, right? Just like the way the structure is set up. And so we're rushing decisions of 30 years, 25, like I don't even know how that makes sense sometimes. Like, we're just navigating between 5 more years like it's chicken nuggets. Like that's the actual thing that I think judges are doing at times. And again, like the pressures on them to do that also have to be acknowledged. So it's, yeah, 100%. I think slowing down. I think if I look at a structural thing that could be done from a judge, from the involvement I had with a presentation with Judge Ashley to the judges conference about 2 years ago, it was realizing that one, judges in general, when they're like, there's a kind of a test to see their mind state about things, and they tend to have more of a black and white view. Like that's an actual accepted thing, I believe. I was told by Judge Ashley. And so one way to, you know, kind of counter that is judges also don't see success stories coming back. They just see you when they're sentencing you. And so how do we start to expose judges a bit more so that they maybe feel more of an incentive and a pressure to also have that time and slow down and to be aware that the folks that I'm sentencing now could be doing, you know, really well for society in 5 years. Maybe I don't give them 15. Maybe I slow that down. So I think some of that conversation is just really about both sides. What can the judges do, but how are we putting pressures on people in the system that really want to help, that makes it really difficult to make those decisions? And that, again, that goes to a lot of dismantling type of conversation.
Thank you. This is a juicy topic, and we are supposed to wrap up somewhere around 7. So I'm going to ask you 22 questions, rapid fire. No. A quick question, and this is for the professor. I know that most of this information was gleaned from publicly available sources that any of us here can have an access to, or at least know where to get it. One participant asks if arrest rate disparities, if there were other iterations that were controlled for socioeconomic status, education level, employment, or other varieties, other than what we just saw here. So most of what we saw seemed to be broken down on race. Were there other?
Right. Yeah. No. It's not easy to, because the system doesn't typically collect like socioeconomic status data. Nothing. You know, they don't ask people how much they make or anything like that. So. Yeah. What's that? Yeah. There's. We're referring to as basic demographics: age, race, and gender. And so those are usually there in the data, but these other sort of contextual pieces are not, and that's what I think is really missing. It's the data just dehumanizes the people. It takes away their story and it just puts them as a number, and then that's it. And then we look at these numbers in aggregate, and the individuals get lost. So I think, So I think that's an important piece that's really still missing.
Thank you. Here's a more tactical, broader question. Several of you spoke about preaching to the choir, being in an echo chamber, and certainly we try to broadcast this out as much as possible. It's available for you to share. We generally get 2,000 to 4,000 views per recording. How can we get more people who aren't in the choir into these kinds of rooms to hear what the community has to say? In particular, judges and prosecutors who often run unopposed.
Trick them. But it's a joke, but it's also true. I mean, like, so
I offer free tacos.
right. I mean, you know, I think there are. I believe that there are access points in most any community to some of these conversations. Right? They're not most of the people in maybe any community, but there are people who are open to this conversation, and they will help you bring it in. They want to bring it in, right? And so it's kind of navigating this. Maybe it's framed differently. Maybe it's sometimes a one-on-one conversation, and then that brings them into a larger conversation. You know, it's like fishing in some capacity. So I think that there are just a variety of strategies that you can do that that would work. And again, like, go back to, these are well-known ways to do these types of things. I just don't think we apply them in these spaces, because I think we get caught up in things should be very straightforward, right and wrong, righteousness principles, and then we avoid the very, you know, strategical, tactical ways to achieve some of these bills and some of these opening of minds and hearts. And I think, damn with that, like, we need to get people to listen. And if I need to offer you, you know, a mega hat to sit down and I'll talk to you, I'm going to do that because I want to talk to you. Doesn't mean you're going to listen, but I mean, I'm willing to kind of engage in these difficult things that I don't necessarily want to have at the front end to bring out the relationship or the understanding at the back end. And so I think it's doable, and it's just finding those access points a lot of times. And also, like I said, you know, not assuming that people are your enemy all the time. You'd be shocked. You really will be shocked by people.
Yeah, I mean, I think target them. I was a freshman in college in a political science class, and read a book about politicians, single-minded seekers of re-election. You want to boil it down, single-minded seekers of re-election? You know, well, there in that sentence gives you the leverage, and I think that there are some efforts. I think that the League of Women Voters has done a great job. I think here in Milwaukee, the Wisconsin Justice Initiative, the ACLU, you know, have candidate questionnaires, have forums, have, you know, nights like this where, you know, people are here because they're you kind of have to push, pull, and drag them. I wouldn't go as far as Shannon in outwardly lying to them, because you're.
I didn't say last, I said frame.
Oh, you said
Framing.
trick? I don't. Anyway, so what my practical advice to that, Emilio, is get 12 groups to host the forum and work together to make it an impossible to ignore event for candidates. And you can do that by putting a lot of butts in the chairs. You can do that by the Rolodex that you all have in this room. If you're here and you're plugged in and you're paying attention, you are the person in your family that your family members text to ask you who to vote for, or the people on the block pay attention to your yard sign. So you use a lot of political power in this room already. And then they're in the forum, in the moment, you know, develop a relationship. If it's a gotcha trap, make them look bad, like kind of what framing it like Shannon was just saying. Hear people, listen to them, don't spring traps on them. If it turns partisan or it turns gotcha, it'll end, no one will ever come back, because someone will advise them. It is far riskier to step into Turner Hall to go to that forum and get a trap question from Emilio right before he's done on the cue cards, then it's valuable to go. And so that might mean, you know, some discipline in how that forum exists. But the worst case is that the candidates go from filing to running to an election and you never hear from them. Because especially in judicial elections, there are just so few forums where people actually talk like normal human beings and you get an opportunity to see who the candidates are.
I think in defense of myself, I've been fairly well behaved.
You've been great. I mean, I'm just saying, you know, the future.
We're not done yet.
I haven't even
That
cussed.
last question could come still.
I was triggered by Shannon saying, lie to him.
I didn't say lie. For the record, people, I never said lie to anyone.
No.
Just framing.
I will share with the three of you, as well as the judge who had to go swear in some new staff. All the other questions. There are a lot of great questions. There are a lot of substantive questions that we received, both before the event, during the event, being texted, written on index cards. For those of you that are here, I want to be respectful of your time as well, to all the viewers that are watching us online. And thank you. Thank you for presenting. Thank the judge who's here. Thank you, Ted and Sarvat and everybody that's done such an incredibly lengthy study. All of this data, comprehensive, thoughtfully gleaned and laid out for us, helps to inform a roadmap to repair, and also makes us think about what data we should continue to demand of our institutions, as well as the importance of human stories from the community. Our reliance on policing and incarceration as a means of punishment and assumed deterrence is clearly rife with racial disparities and is not working. The total costs must be astronomical. I'm not even sure how to create the true total based on how many Milwaukee residents are incarcerated outside the county. But just in Milwaukee, from the police department, courts, and beyond, it's costing us almost $400 million each year. And the DOC is an additional $2.76 billion, and there are 37 custodial facilities around the state. And if you add the human and financial costs of specifically black residents being convicted at 400% more than white residents, you can also subtract what they could have, would have, and should have earned and provided to their families and their communities, both legislatively, financially, emotionally, socially. And that is priceless. So we need to ask ourselves what we were actually doing also for the estimated 2,000 people released back to Milwaukee from incarceration each year, because that's a staggering number. And are the educational, emotional, and professional resources during incarceration adequately preparing them for a transition to success upon return? I think not. And this also has long-lasting human and financial costs. If anything is clear, it's that more needs to be done. Alternatives to incarceration and greater investments in the infrastructure, education, and quality of life that encourage people to choose healthy, pro-social behaviors, to say nothing of the racial disparities in arrests and sentencing, and certainly upstream before an individual has contact with our criminal legal system. Obviously and demonstrably, the police contacts are rising as we speak. These are sobering data and thoughts, friends, and personally I feel a lot of things right now, and I think those are all useful emotions. Our grief at what the system has done to our friends, families, and communities can inform our commitment to stop letting this happen. We heard some important strategies. Even if you don't feel as qualified as the four folks on this panel, you can share this information with others and invite them. The judges come back just to spend the next 4 hours in the personal one-on-ones that I promised you. Our grief at what the system has done to friends, families, and communities can inform our commitment to stop letting this happen. And our righteous anger can be channeled into change. As Mariam Kaba says, hope is a discipline. And so I hope, with intention and commitment, that we can all leave this room taking at least one thing back to our communities and areas of influence. Please get involved where you can and vote for people who will be brave enough to follow the data and build a better world. We can no longer be passive critics. We also encourage you to review Professor Lentz's report and share it with other stakeholders. It's very generous that this is open for you all to share and use as Lego building blocks. Share it with decision makers and think about how the data could and should inform changes to a broken system. Thank you again. Today's nonpartisan virtual forum was sponsored in part by the Milwaukee County Office of Equity, MICA, NLG Milwaukee, the Public Welfare Foundation, and the Hertzfeld Foundation. Once again, I'd like to thank our guests here at Turner Hall. I thanked you in your absence, Judge. And our live stream, our production team, especially Cheston Van Huss, Michaela and Jalise, Chrissy and Jahan, our co-producers, Mustafa, our Confronting Mass Incarceration coordinator, our awesome Turner's team, our wonderful interpreters at DJC Interpreting, and of course the great folks who supported this forum. Before I thank Tapatio for the tacos, I want to direct you to Shannon's table so you can buy coffee to support some of the movement that and
Ready
work
for a
that he
joke?
does. He was giving me the evil eye, so I knew if I didn't mention that. Not a paid commercial break. Also, thank you, Tapatio, for the wonderful tacos. They're located over there at 1125 North 9th. If you're interested in supporting us and the work that we do, or becoming a sponsor of the Vel Phillips Forum, please visit us on Facebook or our website. And before I let you free, I encourage you to join us for at least a couple of events as the Turners are wrapping up Jane's Walk. Friday, June 14th, is the KK River, I don't know how to pronounce that lengthy word, Kinnickinnick River, revitalized and not with fellow Turner Emmett Gross, salute by the way. And Saturday, June 15th, is kayaking with the Urban Ecology Center. These are free events. You can visit MilwaukeeTurners.org to find out more. Please join us for free yoga on Thursdays, free here at 11 a.m. for adults 50 and older with Oksana, and yoga for any adults at 6 p.m. with Fred, who some of you already know pretty well. We're also excited to share that our community wellness coordinator, seated right over there, Andron Lane, is receiving a Father of the Year award from Fathers Making Progress on Friday, June 14th. You can still get tickets to their gala at their website. I have promised that I would embarrass a different staff person and dear friend each forum, and I have completed my promise. Until next time, all right, I'm going to wait. We're going to hear from Shannon, and then I'm going to bid that you all be kind to one another.
I wanted to add one thing. I guess I'm kind of feeling a bit self-conscious because I don't have all the solutions, right? And I don't want to be up here as a representative saying like what should and shouldn't happen. There's wonderful work being done across the city from different organizations that are engaged in some of these questions that might be better. I kind of look around the room and see some people that are doing some of that work, participatory budgeting, for example. A lot of things that are involved in, right now, local politics that I think are really important, which is not my lane and I can't speak to enough. So if you're looking for those types of answers, they're out there for sure. I think check out the African American Roundtable, for example, as a one place to start, but there's other ways and other places that you can look for some of these actual right now solutions that can be done that, again, I'm not as conversant on to speak to. So I don't want to make it seem like what I'm saying is I know what should and shouldn't happen. I just know my lane, and I know that other people are doing a good job in those other lanes. So that's what I want to highlight. And the last thing is the coffee is, which I forgot to mention, it's a fundraiser that we did with Collectivo, so all proceeds go to us. So if you want any, the artwork on the cover is currently and formerly incarcerated artwork. They're $16 a bag. It's whole. Don't cuss me out because it's whole coffee. I don't even drink coffee, so I don't know what the significance is. I've been cussed out enough for that. So that's back there if anyone's interested. And I would love, Ted, if there's a possibility of maybe in the future having a way to take some of these ideas that people are trying to get going locally, but it's always difficult because I think like the funding and the resources and the apparatus for it isn't there, and just kind of evaluate like the viability of some of these larger plans. I think the Hone Bridge is doing that about like juvenile something. I think there was a whole big contest, or that probably is a bad word, but I would love to see that as a way to like break down some of those larger ideas to give people a possibility of saying, this is something I think would work. Let's evaluate that instead of just being out there with no, context. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Thank you for all of that. There are many people doing great work. If you're uncertain how to contact folks, you can email me, you can email Shannon, you can really reach out to any of the folks out here, and we'll make sure that that's shared. Until next time, please take care of one another. Thank you.